I did Rachel Maddow, I think around 8 o'clock. And I remember feeling a pain in my stomach and being like, something's wrong. And went to the ER, and I remember getting to the ER and just collapsing. And I got appendicitis the day of repeal. What's touching about the story is that I was dating someone at the time, and I had to have my boyfriend call my commander to say, hey, he's in the hospital, he's having emergency surgery. And I'll never forget that moment because it was the first time I realized the policy was over. Like, here's someone identifying themselves as my boyfriend and saying I'm gay. Even though I was going through this horrible experience, it was happy at the same time.
Feeling lost?
Then you're in the right place.
I'm Amanda Knox.
And I'm Christopher Robinson.
And this is Labyrinths.
According to the Human Rights Campaign, the nation's largest LGBTQ civil rights organization, President Trump is poised to reinstate and expand his previous administration's ban on transgender military service members. This, of course, isn't the first time that there's been controversy over the status of this community in the armed services. Until 1993, homosexuality was considered a disqualifying factor for military service, leading to discharges of gay individuals. That year, the Clinton administration issued Defense Directive 1304.26, which decided that military applicants were not to be asked about their sexual orientation. Amongst the press and those serving, it quickly became known as Don't Ask, Don't Tell. With this directive, homosexual or bisexual individuals were technically allowed to serve, though they had to keep their sexual orientation a secret. Air Force veteran and LGBTQ activist Josh Seefried, under the pseudonym J.D. Smith, helped repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell. But through his long and tumultuous military career, he can tell you better than anyone that the post-Don't Ask, Don't Tell military world is still far from inclusive.
This is really emotional for me because after I did this amazing thing by working on repeal, I didn't actually just face Article 32s. And for people that don't know what that is, an Article 32 is the equivalent kind of a grand jury. And for over 5 years of my life, I sat awaiting trial, and I went through a full trial. For a long time, this consumed my life, consumed everything about me. And, your stories always resonated with me because especially afterwards, you talked about reclaiming your narrative. And I feel like for the first time, I really want to do that because there's so many other people like me that have gone through this process that, don't know what to do, don't know how to navigate the military justice system. And I look back now, almost 10 years later, and I'm like, what happened to me was wrong. And it's happening to other people. And I'm really tired of getting phone calls from service members awaiting trial, trying to potentially kill themselves. And I don't want to reach the age of 40 without ever talking about this and trying to change the system. Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and the people that served under it are facing a lot of these legal troubles, right? A lot of people, when you ask them, hey, do you know about the military justice system? Do you know that there's not unanimous jury requirements, that they don't have protections of the grand jury? They don't know this. And so imagine if I would have sat in front of a jury. I chose a judge-alone trial, but this jury pool would have just experienced the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell and would have outranked me. People that were taught their whole lives that being gay was wrong. I would have never gotten a fair shot. And a lot of the times, most lawyers will say, go judge alone.
Can you talk a little bit about what things Don't Ask, Don't Tell allowed for homosexual service members, but also what it did not allow?
Being gay was always an issue in the military. There's records from the archives that talk about Washington drumming out a gay person back for the Revolutionary War. So it really does stretch back. This was meant to be a compromise by the Clinton administration. And to be honest, it wasn't. It created a horrible scenario when it comes to Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And I think to a lot of leaders right now, they think that us serving while gay was just us missing brunch among our friends. But it wasn't.
Were these policies put into effect by military people or by politicians? I'm curious to know, like, what people who are in the military thought about don't ask, don't tell. Because if it's true, that means that you are dooming certain members of the military family to isolation and ostracization. Like, was it meant to sort of discourage homosexual people from entering the military in the first place?
I look back now and we're at some big distance now. We're at, 30 years since the policy first was enacted, 14 years since it was repealed. And I don't know what they were thinking. It was put on by the politicians as a compromise to Clinton, who wanted to just do away with the ban. But to be honest, military members didn't care, like, at all. A lot of service members were out. People knew they were gay, and it was a non-issue. I don't know what the heck we were thinking when we did this. I had to go to a family member's wedding this weekend, and I sat next to an enlisted airman, and he's 23, and I asked him, I was like, so what's it like serving next to gay people? He's straight. And he kind of was shocked at me for asking the question. He never even knew what don't ask, don't tell was. He's never served under it. To him, it's a non-issue.
Right.
And it was the first time I personally realized the work that I had put in with other people that changed the culture. And we did it successfully because it's a non-issue right now. So anything you see about like, these gay people or these trans people are going to hurt the military, it's simply not true. Everyone in the military that's serving knows it's a non-issue.
Interesting. I'm also from a younger generation, but I remember being in a Catholic high school and starting the Gay Straight Alliance at my school, and they're getting pushback from teachers or other authority figures who asked the dumbest questions, like, are you trying to like recruit gay people? They didn't like understand. Even though it wasn't encoded into the school, it felt like there was a culture of don't ask, don't tell. Like, we know who the gay kids are, but we're just not going to talk about it. And it seems that the military, for whatever reason, felt like it needed to codify this because you could be discharged for being who you are.
But I want to talk about one thing here, too, because you bring up a great point. A lot of people also just assume that people would get kicked out for don't ask, don't tell. And this is one of the things that we have to deal with in the military justice system now, is that they would collaterally discharge people. And this also applies to desegregation. And I'll point to some examples here. But imagine I'm a very homophobic commander, and I want to get out this gay troop. Right now, I couldn't do it, right? Because don't ask, don't tell has gone away. I'm going to look at misbehavior. I'm going to look at all these other issues, and I'm going to court-martial them for that. We're going to try them in front of a non-unanimous jury. That leads to dishonorable discharges and things like that. But on top of that, the commander is also picking the jury pool. So like there is so much damage collaterally in the military justice system that we haven't even wrapped our heads around yet. And there's documented cases, especially after desegregation that occurred. Black soldiers were court-martialed for playing quote unquote jungle music. They got discharged for this, and we had to fix discharge statuses for these folks. This is wrong. And we haven't even scratched the surface of what's going on with the military justice system.
That's interesting. So what you're saying is that the policy specifically prohibits discriminating against LGBTQ military service members. And so instead, there's a kind of either retaliation or, as you said, collateral, where people are finding excuses. So basically, they're just digging into the person's, personal history and finding any little tiny mistake and trying to use that as grounds for court-martialing?
Yeah, I'll give you the clearest example, and I firsthand witnessed this. It's 100% true. I had an airman at my base who was diagnosed with HIV, and there's still a lot of issues with HIV criminalization in the military. And the commander took action to remove him from any leadership position, anything that he was doing, because he was suddenly HIV positive, which is completely not grounded in science. The kid killed himself. And this was while I was still active duty. And this is the kind of stuff I'm talking about. For these folks put under our military justice system, what support do they have? A lot of the times you hear in the news, oh, we're going to beef up prosecution. We're going to give all the prosecution these resources. But at these military bases, there's no support structure. And imagine folks like me who were under investigation and went to trial for 5 years. Like, I can honestly say I look back now and I can't believe I survived, because it leads to the darkest points of your life. I think you relate to that.
I want to take a step back and ask, why did you want to serve in the military?
For me, this sounds silly, but it was when I went to space camp. I went to space camp when I was little, I think 4th grade. And I remember coming back and being like, how do I do this when I grow up? And my parents said, go to the Air Force Academy. And I kid you not, that's what happened. That's what I set my mind on. And I saw no other future besides that. It's just what I wanted to do because I loved this so much.
Did you anticipate as a young gay person what obstacles and hardships you might face in that environment?
No. And to be honest, it's really a romantic story. I mean, my first year there, I had a best friend who was an upperclassman, and we were just best friends. And then I'll never forget my sophomore year, a friend told me that he was gay. It was like one of the other first people I ever met at the Air Force Academy. And at that point, we started dating like 24 hours later once we found out about each other. And it was just love. And then we broke up because of the policy, because there's no way to really navigate because he graduated and I was there. And I spiraled. Like, what do you do at the point where you lose the person you love and you don't have any friends? You have to stay at the Air Force Academy because past your sophomore year, you owe the government money. And that's kind of where my whole journey started. It was a relationship. It ended. And that's when I realized I'm gay. I'm in the military. What the hell do I do?
Oh, God.
And at that point, I actually started to find other people. I started connecting people on MySpace groups that were gay at the Air Force Academy and that spread to the other service academies. And that is what was the basis to my organization years later.
When did you first hear about this don't ask, don't tell policy? And what did you think?
I was familiar with Don't Ask, Don't Tell even in my high school years. I was a big debate nerd, like a big debate nerd. And I remember it coming up, but I never understood what it meant until I was serving under it. But it was that relationship when I realized this is going to dictate my life for the rest of my life. And actually, I turned down a pilot slot because I thought it would come at a head for me in the future. So if you graduate from the Air Force Academy, you have a choice, pilot or not pilot. And if you do pilot, you're going to owe about 9 years. And I couldn't do it. So I switched from pilot to not. And it honestly was the right choice for me. But giving up that dream, I've always kind of like played it off that I didn't want to be a pilot or whatnot. But to be honest, it was a dream crusher and there was just no way to do it. There's no way to reconcile it.
So the reason why you didn't want to take the pilot was because you would have to stay longer in the military and that would mean you'd be longer closeted. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, and I wanted to have a family. I wanted to be who I was and not hide it. You know, when you graduate from the Air Force Academy and you're like, I got to now do this career this way, it's kind of heartbreaking. Like, there's no other way to put it because you care so much about what you do. Any person that served in the military will say that. It's such a family. You can't separate your career and life. And that's how it was for me. So when this all started to happen, it was heartbreaking. There was blackmail, there was sexual assault, and you can't report it. There was so much damage that was done that we even haven't scratched the surface at all right now on what's occurring. And so, you know, when I had a partner, when I was serving, you can't bring them around, but you've also got to hide them because if you posted something wrong on social media, you were done. I'll talk about 2 scenarios that happened to me personally. I've never admitted it to this point, but it's always been kind of beat around the bush. But my time at the Air Force Academy was awful. I was sexually assaulted there, and I actually had medical help. There's a medical file that exists because of this. And if you look back at my own story, you'll notice that I linked up with a reporter named John Ferrugia, who famously broke the Air Force Academy sexual assault scandal. It changed the whole Department of Defense when it comes to sexual assault. And the reason he and I connected, a lot of people always wondered, it was because after my own assault, I went to him for help. And he helped me get a lot of mental health support and helped me navigate the system because I can't turn around to my leadership and say, hey, this is what happened to me. And so you had scenarios like that. But after I graduated from the Air Force Academy, what happened was I was sent down to Biloxi, Mississippi. And through just gay apps, my instructor found out I was gay. And he decided to start blackmailing me. Say, hey, if you don't, do sexual favors, I'm going to decrease your scores. I turned around and turned him in. I actually went to the chaplain corps. I went to my chaplain and said, hey, I don't know what to do here. So he helped me turn him in. About a month later, I was put under Don't Ask, Don't Tell investigation. I had volunteered to go to Afghanistan at the time. They took away my card and they put me literally at the chapel. And I helped carry Bibles from the basement up to the attic just to move stuff for months. And then that's when I really started to work on my organization called OutServe at the time to really connect service members, because I thought that if I was going to go down, I was at least going to connect all these service members for the very first time so they had a fighting chance.
So back when you were blackmailed by your superior, who was demanding sexual favors in order to keep your sexual orientation secret, you went to the chaplain, told him what happened, and it ended up being reported to what authority?
The commander. When you're in the military, your commander really has all that power.
Okay.
So your unit or your whatever branch you're in, that commander is the one that holds all the power for court martials, for any kind of disposition on anything. So it went to that commander.
Okay. And so this commander learned that one of his soldiers was being blackmailed for sexual favors by a superior. What was his response?
They launched an investigation. At this point, they could not get my full cooperation because I was gay and it would out me. But they did an investigation. And in that time, they also found out that he was doing this to other lieutenants at the time, too. Male and female, by the way. I don't know what ultimately happened to the person. I know that he was fired. I've heard some very dark things about what happened next. And to be honest, I never wanted to know. It's too dark of a history for me. And I don't care to know what happened to him. I'll say this. I know he's not alive anymore.
So the blackmail thing was separate. It was the person who sexually assaulted you while you were in the academy, who they were trying to get you to testify against while you were working to help repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
Yep. Because this commander became in charge of other units.
I see. And so they wanted you to testify against him, basically.
Yep. And this is all verifiable. Like, the interviews exist. And that's another funny story is when I FOIA'd all this afterwards, I think I got like 6 pages of stuff. Like, the FOIA was a joke and you just couldn't get certain stuff. But I do plan to try to start to get some of the stuff back if I can, even though it's been years, because people deserve to know what went down.
Right. And you decided that you did not want to participate in that case because you didn't have faith that anything would come of it. Like, can you explain your decision making on that?
I gave them enough to give them some other leads. Like, I told them, hey, here's some other people that I know this happened to, but you're about to take me to trial. And if you want me to resign in lieu of, giving this information, I'm not going to do it. That goes against everything. Like, I'm innocent and I'm not going to compromise that. Like, I had no interest in doing anything else except for clearing my name, even if it took years.
Yes, absolutely. So before Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed back in 2011, how long were you working to repeal the law, and what did it involve for you?
I graduated from the Air Force Academy May of 2009, and I immediately went to my first base 2 months later. I think it was December of 2009, I was blackmailed. And that's when I started just to organize gay service members for the very first time. It's funny, it was just through Facebook groups. And then I'd have people refer people in. If 2 people vouched for you, you were allowed into the system. That led to the creation of the organization OutServe. We got a lot of publicity when I wrote a letter to, it was the Secretary of Defense at the time, who was speaking up in SUNY Oswego. And they asked me to come speak. I spoke under a pseudonym, J.D. Smith, and no one could take photos. And it caught national attention. At that point, the White House and the Pentagon reached out to us because for the first time, they had thousands of service members they could talk to that were gay, and they could get input. It was a resource they didn't have. So the White House and Pentagon needed it.
I think that's interesting because that just in itself, like the legal problem of even talking to service members, because if a service member outed themselves as being gay, then they would have to be legally discharged. So they couldn't come out and give information. Like, it's just like a legal nightmare.
Well, think about this too. Like, I was a second lieutenant in the Air Force at the time, and I'm going down to the White House and the Pentagon, and they know who I am. Like, I mean, so I was living a not only double life, I was living like a triple life, like Pentagon, White House, at work, and then at home. Like, it was absolutely nuts.
So can I step back for a second? Because you were sexually assaulted in school.
Yeah.
And then as soon as you get out of school, you were blackmailed.
Yep.
So much for feeling like you're a part of a military family. Like, what?
Do you want to know the darkest part?
Yes, please.
When I was under investigation and facing my trial, the Secretary of the Air Force offered me a chance to resign if I turned around and basically testified the person who assaulted me, because it turned out that person was moved to my base and was under investigation for hurting others. And so they were going to offer me the chance to step away. It's called resigning in lieu of. It's another side thing with the military justice. And the interview's there, like it's recorded. And I said, here's the information you need to know, but I'm not participating any farther because how do I trust the system at this point? And that's on the Secretary of the Air Force's hands. Like they had a chance to help stop this abuser and they wanted to go after a high profile person.
So how long was the process where you were J.D. Smith repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell?
I was J.D. Smith from basically all of 2010. And then 2011, September, the policy was changed. So I would go on, say, Rachel Maddow or other news outlets completely in shadow. And they would just know me as J.D. Smith. And that lasted for over a year. No one knew who I was. Even gay service members on Facebook, it was just J.D. Smith, and I would not reveal who I was because it was the only way to protect me. Then on September 20th, I'll never forget this, it's the day that repeal happened. And I was stationed in New Jersey at the time, and no one knew my base or my command structure that I was about to do this. I remember writing on my whiteboard, you're probably going to want to talk to me. Here's my email, my phone number. And then at like midnight that night when I was down in D.C., the New York Times reported who I was. All these other outlets finally revealed my identity. And then I was up on Capitol Hill and did this whole press tour. And it was a real one. Like I had thousands of emails. I'm not kidding you, thousands of emails on my work email thanking me for what I had done and pushing the way I did. So that whole process of being J.D. Smith was about a year and a half. I'll give you a funny side story of repeal that no one really knows about. I did Rachel Maddow, I think around 8 o'clock. And I remember feeling a pain in my stomach and being like, something's wrong. And went to the ER, and I remember getting to the ER and just collapsing. And I got appendicitis the day of repeal. But what's touching about the story is that I was dating someone at the time, and I had to have my boyfriend call my commander to say, hey, he's in the hospital, he's having emergency surgery. And I'll never forget that moment because it was the first time I realized the policy was over. Like, here's someone identifying themselves as my boyfriend and saying I'm gay. Even though I was going through this horrible experience, it was happy at the same time.
Right. I mean, it really highlights what it was all about because you're right. Like anyone who would argue that the only thing you're missing is brunch with your gay friends is really being extremely crass and stupid, honestly. Like you're asking somebody to not have a family, to not support your loved ones. Like my family has military background. Like my grandfather was in the military. My uncle was in the military. The entire family is then bound in a way, is married to the military as a result. And to not be able, like, to have those people beside you and be a part of that and be integral to that is huge rift in your life. So you're right. Like that's just like a small example of, oh, you're in the middle of surgery. My boyfriend needs to inform my superior what's going on. What was going on in your life after repeal?
At that point, I had helped build a pretty large organization. We had merged with another organization called Service Members Legal Defense Network, which was defending people, say, in court or any other legal problem. And we merged with them. And so at that point, I became very familiar then with the military justice system. And I went back to my job. It was a big point to me to go back and do my job perfect because that's what we had to do. The other big thing that I think we really see the effects of now was that I really wanted to make sure that we ripped off the Band-Aid as hard as we could on September 20th, the repeal day. And by that, I mean, we had over 100 people come out in various news articles and things like that, because I didn't want us to have trickles of like, oh, here's one gay person here, here's one gay person here. I wanted to show, hey, we're here, we're doing our job, this is who we are. And I think that number one was the biggest contribution I had to the movement, was that it ripped the Band-Aid off and we got where we are now.
So I imagine things were going along swimmingly until all of a sudden, one day you were under investigation for sexual assault.
So someone accused me of sexual assault. I faced what was called an Article 32 3 times. This Article 32 is what we like to think is a grand jury equivalent. It's really not. But what happened in my case is a military judge, a colonel, adjudicated my case and recommended to not move forward with my case.
According to the Legal Information Institute, U.S. Code 832, Article 32, requires that a preliminary hearing shall be held before referral of charges. This hearing determines the validity of the charges, whether or not there is probable cause to believe that the accused committed the offense, and a non-binding recommendation as to whether the case should continue to criminal prosecution in military court. 3 separate times, the preliminary hearing officer, an impartial judge appointed by the military court, recommended not to take Seefried's case to trial.
Now, in the military justice system, a commander can overrule that. So here is this colonel that said, do not take him to trial. My commander overruled that and said, we got to go to trial. Now, a lot of people ask me, why do you think he did that? And I think it's pretty simple. All the promotions for these general officers are done through the Senate. And you look back at any general promotion that's been held up, it takes one senator to do that. So, of course, if my trial is not going forward, the general's career is over. It's going to take one senator to say, hey, they're letting this high-profile gay person off. I don't think the general had much of a choice. But that's what happened in my case, was it was overruled by the general 3 times.
I can't imagine what a mindfuck it would be to be accused of sexual assault after having been a victim of sexual assault. Can you tell me about that?
It was dark. There's no other way to put it. And especially because I had been open about it to some people. Some people knew about this stuff since college. My accuser knew about this. And you just go to a dark place because I saw both sides of it, right? Like I saw what it does to you being the victim. And then I saw how the justice system can turn against you the other way. I'm probably one of the few people that's seen both sides of this. And both sides are horrible. And I think that's the thing that people don't understand is that, yeah, we need to believe the victim. We need to believe everything and help that person. But there's another person over here, too, that deserves justice. It's the cornerstone of everything we stand for as a democracy. And we can't forget that. And I want to really talk about how, if there are service members listening, this is a really important part to listen to because it will apply to you. I was at work at my computer, and I remember my first sergeant came to me and said, hey, we got to go talk to someone real quick. And I was like, what's going on? Would not tell me. I got led into a really small room, interrogation room. And they said, hey, we have some questions. And I said, what is this about? They gave me maybe like 5 seconds. And at that point, I said, I would like a lawyer. And that's really the key part is like, we all hear about this in the civilian world. But in the military justice world, you're taught to obey your commander. You're taught to obey leadership. That's not the thing to do here. The thing to do here is to shut up. Nothing you can say can ever help you at all. You need to play by the rules and protect yourself because their job is to put you in jail at that point, nothing else.
Again, I kind of want to sit with this for a second because you're right. Like in the military, there is a hierarchical structure that everyone believes in because it makes sense. It's how the military functions. And yet, there's this weird limbo space, right? Your superior officer comes in to talk to you and says, hey, come with me. Yes, sir. You sit down and they start interrogating you. And it seems like all of your training and all of your experience tells you answer any and all questions that they pose to you. Did they at all ever say, we are investigating you for sexual assault and you have the right to an attorney? How did that go down?
Yeah, they definitely read me my Miranda rights. At that point, I knew something was wrong. Every Law and Order episode kicked in at that point and said, just shut up and figure out how to go through this. I never gave a defense. Even my defense at trial was 5 minutes long and we rested. What bugs me the most out of this is that, I never got to tell my side of the story. And the verdict was, just 10 minutes long until I was acquitted. And I didn't even present a defense. That's how bullshit this thing was. I mean, there's no other way to put it. I'll never forget when my defense attorney stood up and looked at the judge and said, the fact that we're in this room is mind-blowing. And it is. To this day, years later, I cannot believe that I went through that process because there's nothing there. There never was. I never got the chance to really explain that.
What was going on? How much can you share with me about?
I'll say this, that there was an accusation over Fleet Week up in New York City. I was just basically accused, along with another service member, of sexual assault.
So you were presented with this accusation.
So I faced my first Article 32. They said, don't take him to trial. I actually thought it was over at that point. Like, I was celebrating. I was like, this is over. The system worked. And then I got the news that the colonel overruled it. And then I'm like, okay, fine, we'll go to trial. But then they had a problem because they weren't going fast enough. So they had to take away the charges, retry me with new charges, just because they didn't want to run out of the speedy clock. And so I had to face a new Article 32. Same process again happened.
On different charges? Like, what are the different charges?
No, they just, in the military, they can drop them and refile them.
I see.
Because of the speedy trial law.
I see.
Because you still have the right to a speedy trial somewhat. Now, does it exist? No.
That's a weird loophole, though.
It exists, and I'm not the only one to talk to any military lawyer. It's a common practice. They just withdraw the charges and say, hey, we're going to refile them. And that's all they have to do.
How is that not a violation of a speedy trial? It seems bizarre to me that...
Well, we got to remember, like, we have a lot of these situations that have gone to the Supreme Court and they've ruled not in favor. Like, for example, like, if you have a murder trial in the military justice system, that does not have to be unanimous. 2/3 to convict. Think about it this way, too. I was an officer that had a book deal. I had some money, so I was able to provide a private attorney. Imagine if I'm a young enlisted person that's eligible for food stamps that gets accused of this crime. They don't have any money to go to any defense attorney. And then the defense attorney for the base is usually spread out between a couple bases. So it's like, how does anyone, especially young enlisted people, get a fair shot in the system? And the answer is they don't.
So they drop the charges, they recharge you. Do they have to drop the charges again and recharge you?
They did. Yep. It was, again, I had the recommendation not to go to trial. The commander overruled it and said, take him to trial. And then at this point is when my own situation came up where they're like, hey, do you want to resign? And first I was like, I'll think about it, maybe. And I did put in a packet to say, hey, let's look at this, because I was at this point, I think 5 years into it, and I just wanted my life back.
Of course.
At some point, you get beaten down so much. And I was like, I just want a chance to live my life. Because I could have served any prison sentence at this point.
Right.
And then at that point, we went to a trial. I think my trial lasted 3 days.
Were there witnesses? Like, what was even under discussion?
By witnesses, I mean that they presented people to talk.
Right. Of course. Yes. That's what I mean by witness as well. They just invited some people who happened to be at Fleet Week or whatever.
Who had their own misconduct, by the way. Like, there was a pilot who ran through a glass door that I think is still serving. And it's just like, they had their own incentives to protect themselves. And so the trial lasted 3 days. They presented maybe about like 8 people. And also they even presented a doctor who was on my side. The doctor that they presented said, this didn't occur. I'm not kidding you. If you go look at the trial transcripts, every one of their witnesses essentially was on my side too. And then we get to presenting the defense. We presented one expert about something for like about 10 minutes, was done. I'll never forget sitting at that table. It's an experience. You can't ever forget it. But going back and waiting for the judge to make his decision, he said, give me 15 minutes. And I was like, I think it's over. Like, at that point, I was like, there's no way he's got to even think about this. Everyone knows at this point. And I asked to be alone for 15 minutes. I went back in the room and it was over. And I don't want to say who it is because I don't want to get into trouble, but someone came up to me afterwards and hugged me and was crying and said, I'm so sorry you went through this. And I went back to work the next day. That's all you could do. But some of the emotional toll during this process was heartbreaking. I mean, when you don't get a chance to go back home after this. So like when I was ready for my verdict day, my house was packed up. Everything was ready to go. I had power of attorneys to sign over to my friends to say, hey, if I go to jail for I don't know how long, I hope you can take care of all this stuff. I had animals. They make you pack this green bag. It's a green duffel bag. They make you buy all these clothing, like your ABUs, your PT gear, and these brand new shoes. It's probably about $2,000. I still haven't unpacked it to this day. It's downstairs and I can't bring myself to unpack it. It's like, that's the emotional toll you go through because you don't know what's about to happen.
Just so I understand totally, this is the green duffel bag of like all the belongings you would be able to take with you into prison if you were found guilty?
Yeah, so like clean underwear and your boots, because you have to wear your uniform in jail. And
wow,
I've never been able to unpack it. I mean, it's been years and it's still sitting down there.
Wow.
And I don't want to throw it away.
Of course not.
Because I want to remember this.
Yeah.
But for me, it represents a lot of emotional baggage that had to, because we talked about the money with these young enlisted, but imagine after trying to like defend yourself, a young enlisted person then has to drop about $2,000 on all this stuff for a prison bag that they may or may not use.
God, that's insane.
I mean, it's silly, but who writes me this check of all this stuff I bought that like I never use, you know?
Can I go back into these 5 years that you spent defending yourself? Your commander, presumably somebody who you knew, who you at least had interacted with before? Like, is this somebody who you had any kind of face-to-face interaction with?
No. I had my commander, but at this time, a general. My commander wasn't a general, so it goes to the person above him. I do want to tell a story about him, though. During the Article 32 process, he has to testify. And I faced these Article 32s at Andrews Air Force Base, and he was the commander there in the same building of the trial. Every single time he testified by phone. He wouldn't walk down the stairs to look me in the eyes and say, we should go to trial or not. He did it on the phone. It's one of the things that I don't think I could ever forgive that person for. It's like, you ruined years of my life and you didn't have the leadership quality to come downstairs and look me in the face, look at any airman in the face that you put this through. That's wrong. It's bad leadership.
Gosh, what do you make of this? Like, the fact that the judge multiple times recommended that you not go to trial, and yet it was pushed. Do you think that this was retaliation for repeal, don't ask, don't tell?
I can't speak to his motivations, but I do think that the system sets generals up to make no other decision. Like, if your promotion is on the line and it takes one senator to uphold your promotion, no general is going to not take everything to trial. And this is a great stat to look at, is that a lot of advocates will point to the conviction rate's going down in the military. The reason it's going down is because we're taking worse and worse cases to trial. It's not because we're bad at prosecuting. The prosecution team is stacked. It's because we're taking bad cases to trial. I can't speak to this person's motivation, but I can speak to the fact that the system incentivizes it.
Why do you think that worse and worse cases are being brought to trial?
Yeah. So put yourself in the shoes of a general and you want to get that second star. And suddenly you have a person under your command that's facing this trial and it's taken some publicity. It's gotten some news. Now, do you think that senator for that base in that area is going to say, hey, this shouldn't go to trial? No, they're going to say, General, you should have taken everything to trial. They're going to advocate for the alleged victim. That's what's going to occur. And I will say a couple high-ranking officials after my trial took me out to dinner and apologized for things and said that their positions were changing because of my trial. Because I will tell you, I'm always the open book. Like, I just don't hide things. My life has somehow always weirdly been a way to help push change. There's people that said, we need to change the policy because of this, because of your trial. And to their benefit, it has changed a little bit.
Another thing that gives me pause here is the fact that at your third Article 32 hearing for these same charges that they could not get their act together and get going, they offered you the opportunity to resign instead of go to trial, right? So basically they were giving you an out. They were saying, we're going to drop the charges against you if you testify in a different trial. You're accusing someone of sexual assault, but you're willing to let them off the hook if they're willing to put someone else in prison for sexual assault. You'd think that if sexual assault was so important to you, you wouldn't just let someone who you believed to be guilty of sexual assault off the hook just to get somebody else. What's going on there?
I don't know. For my own mental health, I never looked into what happened to this person afterwards. I don't know if this person ended up going to trial or whatnot. I just know that I was told to go do an interview with OSI, which is the Office of Special Investigations, regarding my own situation, and that if I cooperated, the Secretary of the Air Force was paying attention, and likely I would not face a trial. That's what I was told coming into it. I don't even know if my defense attorney fully knows that that's what I was told going into that room, but I had to work a lot about this over the last few years. And last year especially, it came to a head where I had to actually deal and go through therapy with this. I checked myself in for 30 days to a facility because I suffer from PTSD from my own attack. And then going through this, like you said, on the other side, it's damaging. I still don't know everything that occurred, but I guess it's heartbreaking at the end of the day, is what I'll say.
Yeah. So let's talk about that. Finally, you get that ruling. You don't have to take that green bag with you and ask your friends to take care of your animals and all of your stuff. You get to go home. now what?
I'll never forget that night. I had bought a Pappy Von Winkle bottle a few weeks prior, and I was like, we're going to drink this, right after it's cleared. And I did. I had like 40 friends get a hotel room, and we just celebrated. I felt so loved after it. But then I had to go to work the next day. Like, no kidding, the next day. And I remember my commander had asked to meet with me. And I can honestly say to this day, I cannot remember what happened to that meeting. And that's a sign of, the trauma, like when these memory gaps happen. And I know he apologized, but I can't tell you what happened in that meeting. But other than that, I was told, hey, I got a pick of assignment to say, hey, you can go anywhere you want in the world. But at that point, I couldn't do it anymore. I said, how do I trust the Air Force anymore? And I filed paperwork to get out, and I did. And at that point, I literally sailed around the world. I rented big yachts at different parts around the world, like Thailand, Croatia. And I threw amazing parties around the world and created really successful businesses. And I just wanted to start living life because I felt like for the last several years, I had no life. And I didn't. Like, those years in the Air Force, they put me in a room and said, sit here and color. And that's all I could do. And even the torment during that period, like I would face, other military members dropping brochures off at my desk saying, you're guilty. It was a horrible, horrible time. And I got no support. Like I'm not being dramatic here. I said there was zero support in the Air Force when I was under investigation or facing trial, like none. And there's no doubt in my mind, I would love for the Department of Defense to release how many people have killed themselves while they're awaiting trial. I don't think that number is ever public.
So people have reached out to you that are going through similar situations. Is that fair to say?
Yes. And I am going to be jumping more into this issue. Like really, this interview is the first time I'm kind of saying, hey, I'm coming to bat right now. I'm working with a couple of big law firms to look at, hey, what cases should we pick up that have gone to trial, that have been convictions, and what can we do to help fight for this? I've made contact with people at Leavenworth. I'm looking at cases. I'm looking at cases that are pending right now. I'm letting folks know, like, I'm in this issue now. And I don't want people to go through what I did. And I don't think anyone can look me in the face or look anyone in the face and say, our service members don't deserve unanimous juries. I do not see how people can justify that. It does not need to exist. We need to have unanimous juries if we're going to put them in prison.
So this is your next don't ask, don't tell, basically. What's the new law?
I won't speak to specific policy changes because I do have limitations there, but I will say that overall, we need to have unanimous juries. We need to have more defense support for people that are accused of these crimes. And those are the two just starting points that we can get to, is people need a fair shot to go through the system. And, we need to challenge the people that say, it's the same argument we use during Don't Ask, Don't Tell. They'll say, these commanders need this flexibility. Tell me why. Tell me why you only need 2/3 of a jury to put someone in prison. And the answer is because they want to put them in prison. They want an easier way to do it. That's the only answer you can give. So, what's next for me is I am stepping into this realm. I'm fighting a lot for military justice now. I'm also, in a lot of ways, having fun with my life for the first time.
You can find out more about Josh's work repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and see some of his interviews under the pseudonym J.D. Smith at joshseefried.com.
In the meantime, get lost with us. Find us on Bluesky, at amandaknox.com,
at wisecracker.bsky.social,
on Instagram at amamanox,
at mccarbon.
You can help support our work just by following or subscribing to Labyrinths wherever you listen to your podcasts. And sign up for our free newsletter at amandaknox.com to get the latest on all of our work.
Labyrinths is brought to you by Knox Robinson Productions. This episode was written and produced by us. Our managing producer is Andre Sapp. Our assistant producer is Charlie Darnell. And our theme music is by Josh Budo Karp.